Welcome back to Understanding Covert Abuse Through the Body. This is week 12, the final teaching in this arc. And this week we are naming the deeper pattern that has been underneath so many of the body responses we have been tracing, the incubate response. This teaching is not only another body recognition teaching, it is the bridge. It closes this arc and opens the doorway into the deeper frameworks. The captivity lens, spiritual physics, incarnational neurodivergence, the incubate response, and the predator architectures that come later. Because after we have named surveillance fatigue, installed guilt, freeze, post-conversation confusion, hyper-responsibility, emotional weather shifts, the internal watcher, identity compression, relief in absence, the body carrying what could not be spoken, and survival inside ongoing harm, we can now ask the deeper question. What was my body trying to preserve? What was my empathy trained to carry? What was my love trying to keep alive? And what was placed in my care that was never mine? That is where the incubate response begins. The incubate response is the sacred survival instinct to preserve life, meaning, warmth, connection, and hope. It is the part of the survivor that keeps tending, keeps sensing, keeps watching for the spark, keeps trying to understand, keeps trying to hold the fragile thing together, keeps trying to keep love alive where love was supposed to be. It is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is not naivete. It is not simply people pleasing. It is not only codependency. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is a form of survival brilliance. Especially in sensitive, gifted, neurodivergent, empathic, AuDHD, autistic, ADHD, HSP, INFP, INFJ, intuitive, pattern-aware, body-aware survivors whose nervous systems were wired to notice, synthesize, feel, preserve, and respond. The problem was never that you loved deeply. The problem was never that you sensed deeply. The problem was never that your empathy could perceive pain before others named it. The problem was never that you could feel the room. The problem was never that you wanted life to be preserved. The harm was that captivity trained those sacred capacities to labor for what could not love you back. Your wiring was not the problem. Your empathy was not the problem. Your tenderness was not the problem. Your survival brilliance was not the problem. The problem was the system that redirected your love toward a false assignment, a false egg, something that carried the shape of love responsibility, hope, calling, family, faith, loyalty, or repair, but did not carry the warmth of true life. And for many survivors, especially those formed inside covert abuse, spiritual abuse, narcissistic family systems, closed systems, origin captivity, family captivity, or predator system harm, the body may spend years incubating what was never hers to hatch. A parent's wound, a family image, a spiritual illusion, a promise of love, a role, a fantasy of repair, a system's reputation, a relationship that required your collapse. A version of belonging that could only exist if you kept yourself small. A cold shell that everyone called love. And because your empathy was faithful, you kept warming it. Because your body was brilliant, you kept tracking it. Because your nervous system was trained to notice the smallest signs of life, you kept looking for proof that it could become warm. Because you were wired to preserve meaning, you kept trying to make meaning out of what was harming you. Because you were formed inside conditions where attachment, safety, and survival were braided together, you may have believed, if I can understand it, maybe I can heal it. If I can carry it, maybe it will become love. If I can stay tender enough, maybe they will become safe. If I can explain it correctly, maybe the system will finally see. If I can hold the wound long enough, maybe it will hatch into repair. If I can keep the peace, maybe belonging will arrive. If I can keep loving, maybe I will finally be loved back. That was not foolishness. That was survival. But what you carried was not who you were. And what harm placed in your care was not always your assignment from God. The capstone of the body arc. This final teaching gathers the whole arc. Week 1 named surveillance fatigue, when the body becomes exhausted from being watched, evaluated, read, corrected, interpreted, or monitored. Week 2 named installed guilt, when guilt is planted so deeply that the survivor feels wrong before she has done anything wrong. Week 3 named freeze, when the body becomes still because movement, speech, protest, or clarity were not safe. Week 4 named post-conversation confusion, when the body leaves contact tangled, foggy, self-doubting, and unable to locate truth. Week 5 named hyper-responsibility, when the survivor carries the room, the mood, the outcome, the repair, and the consequences. Week 6 named emotional weather shifts, when the body learns to track atmosphere before anyone says what changed. Week 7 named the internal watcher, when surveillance moves inside. Week 8 named identity compression, when the true self had to become smaller to survive. Week 9 named relief in absence, when the body feels safer when the person, system, or room is not near. Week 10 named the body carrying what could not be spoken, when the body becomes witness before language is safe. Week 11 named survival inside ongoing harm, when leaving was not yet possible and the body had to keep calculating safety. And now week 12 asks, what did all of this train the survivor to carry? What did the body keep alive? What did the nervous system keep warming? What did love keep tending even when life was not being returned? That is the incubate response. It is the body's attempt to preserve life inside captivity. But under harm, that sacred instinct can be redirected toward a false egg. What is the false egg? The false egg is not the survivor's essence. It is not her true self. It is not her God-given calling. It is not her actual child self. It is not the life Jesus planted in her. The false egg is what captivity places into the survivor's care and trains her to protect as though it were sacred life. It may be a wounded parent's need, a family system's image, a church's reputation, a predator's pain, a relationship's potential, a false version of love, a promise that never becomes repair. A role the survivor was assigned before she could consent. A fantasy that if she keeps tending, keeps understanding, keeps forgiving, keeps absorbing, keeps trying, keeps explaining, keeps staying, then the thing will finally become warm. The false egg can feel holy because it is wrapped in the language of love, care, honor, ministry, loyalty, empathy, forgiveness, family, calling, peace, sacrifice, maturity. But inside the body, it does not produce life. It produces exhaustion, collapse, confusion, self-erasure. Hyperresponsibility, identity compression, dread, relief in absence, the internal watcher, the loss of the survivor's own center. The false egg is cold, but the survivor keeps trying to warm it, not because she is foolish, because her love was trained to believe warmth was her job. Because her empathy was trained to believe another person's wound was her assignment. Because her neurodivergent pattern recognition kept detecting the tiniest flicker and thinking, maybe this time, maybe it is changing. Maybe if I understand the pattern better, maybe if I say it more gently, maybe if I hold it longer, maybe if I give more warmth, maybe if I don't give up, maybe if I can just keep it alive. And for survivors with deep empathy, high pattern recognition, creative synthesis, moral clarity, somatic noticing, spiritual discernment, and recursive self-awareness, this can become especially powerful. Because the survivor is not imagining complexity, she is often perceiving real fragments, a real wound, a real need, a real history, a real moment of softness, a real spiritual hunger, a real ache, a real possibility, a real glimmer. But a glimmer is not the same as repair. A wound is not the same as repentance. A need is not the same as love. A moment of softness is not the same as safety. A potential is not the same as life. And a false egg does not become true simply because the survivor warms it faithfully. Honoring neurodivergent wiring. This teaching has to honor neurodivergent wiring carefully because many sensitive, gifted AuDHD, autistic, ADHD, HSP, empathic, INFP, INFJ, or deeply intuitive survivors have been told that their wiring is the problem. Too sensitive, too intense, too much, too perceptive, too emotional, too deep, too analytical, too spiritual, too suspicious, too dramatic, too hard to satisfy, too focused on patterns, too unable to let things go. But inside covert systems, the very wiring that was shamed may have been part of how the survivor survived. Deep pattern recognition may have helped you notice what no one was naming. Somatic awareness may have helped your body detect danger before language arrived. Empathy may have helped you read emotional weather before it shifted. Creative synthesis may have helped you connect scattered fragments into a map. Recursive self-awareness may have helped you track your own inner experience while the system was still unfolding. Spiritual discernment may have helped you feel the difference between God's presence and distorted religious pressure. Language making may have helped you build a bridge where none existed. Your wiring was not defective. Your wiring was carrying truth. But captivity may have used that wiring against you. It may have taken your pattern recognition and turned it into constant scanning. It may have taken your empathy and turned it into wound carrying. It may have taken your sensitivity and turned it into responsibility. It may have taken your creativity and turned it into endless explanations for why the system was not really harming you. It may have taken your moral clarity and turned it into guilt. It may have taken your spiritual perception and turned it into hypervigilance. It may have taken your love and trained it to incubate the false egg. That is not your wiring's fault. That is captivity misdirecting sacred capacity. Jesus does not need to erase your sensitivity to heal you. He does not need to flatten your neurodivergence. He does not need to make you less perceptive. He does not need to take away your empathy. He restores your gifts to their proper place. He separates your wiring from the roles harm fused to it. He teaches your body you can perceive without carrying. You can love without incubating. You can discern without becoming responsible. You can notice pain without making it your assignment. You can be tender without being consumed. You can be brilliant without being harvested. You can be empathic without becoming the womb for someone else's wound. Empathy was not the problem. For many survivors, healing can become confusing because they begin to fear their empathy. They may think, maybe I loved too much. Maybe I cared too much. Maybe I should have been colder. Maybe my tenderness was the problem. Maybe my compassion made me vulnerable. Maybe I need to stop feeling. But the answer is not to despise empathy. The answer is to restore empathy to its proper place. Empathy was never meant to become captivity. Empathy was never meant to erase the self. Empathy was never meant to override body truth. Empathy was never meant to keep harmful systems warm. Empathy was never meant to take responsibility for someone else's repentance. Empathy was never meant to confuse potential with repair. Empathy was never meant to hatch a false egg. Empathy is holy when it remains connected to truth, boundaries, discernment, and God. But under captivity, empathy can be trained into labor. The survivor feels another person's pain and immediately believes, I must soothe it. I must explain it. I must hold it. I must prevent it from becoming worse. I must make meaning of it. I must protect them from the consequences of it. I must stay until it heals. I must keep loving until it changes. But empathy is not assignment by itself. Feeling pain does not mean you are responsible to carry it. Recognizing a wound does not mean you are responsible to become the cure. Understanding why someone harms does not mean you are required to remain available to harm. Seeing their brokenness does not mean you must offer your body as the incubator. That distinction matters. Your empathy can remain alive without remaining enslaved. Your tenderness can remain sacred without being handed back to captivity. Your love can become clean, not cold, clean, connected to Jesus, held by truth, protected by boundaries, free from the false assignment. Survival brilliance. The incubate response is survival brilliance. It is the body doing something extraordinary under impossible conditions. A child or survivor inside a closed system may not be able to leave, may not be able to tell the truth, may not be able to protest, may not be able to name the architecture, may not be believed, may not have a safe witness, may not have language, may not have an exit. So the body finds a way to keep meaning alive. It holds the possibility of love. It studies the system. It tracks the smallest shifts. It preserves connection. It tries to keep the room from collapsing. It tries to turn pain into coherence. It tries to make the unbearable survivable. That is not nothing. That is not weakness. That is intelligence under captivity. But survival brilliance is not the same as freedom. What helped you survive may not be what helps you live now. What kept you attached may not be what restores you. What kept hope alive may need to be separated from a false object. What preserved your humanity inside captivity may now need Jesus to return it to your own life. Because the incubate response can become costly when the survivor keeps giving warmth to what never becomes life. The body gets tired. The nervous system stays activated. The true self compresses. Desire goes quiet. Anger gets swallowed. And truth remains trapped in the body. Relief only arrives in absence, and the survivor's own life waits, not because she has no life, but because so much of her warmth has been directed toward the false egg. Jesus does not shame the survival brilliance. He honors it. Then he redirects it. He says, that love was real. That endurance was real. That perception was real. That hope was real. That tenderness was real. But the assignment was false. Come back to me. Come back to your body. Come back to the life I preserved in you. The true egg. If there is a false egg, then there is also a true one. The true egg is not the system's image, not the parent's wound, not the predator's need, not the church's reputation, not the relationship's potential, not the role, not the false promise, not the ache you were trained to carry. The true egg is the life Jesus preserved in you, the self that was hidden beneath survival, the child who needed warmth, the desire that had no room, the voice that could not yet speak, the gifts that were not meant to be harvested, the calling that was not meant to be fused to captivity, the tenderness that belonged first with God, the body that needed to be held, the inner life that was not supposed to be available for inspection, the sacred center that harm could not own. For many survivors, the true egg may not feel familiar at first because so much warmth went outward, so much attention went to the room, so much care went to the system. So much devotion went to what was cold. So much energy went to making the false egg feel alive. So when Jesus begins redirecting warmth back toward the true egg, it can feel strange. You may not know how to receive your own care. You may not know how to feel desire. You may not know how to rest without earning it. You may not know how to protect your own body without guilt. You may not know how to let your gifts exist without being useful. You may not know how to love without carrying. You may not know how to let the false egg remain cold without rushing to warm it again. This is part of the healing, not because you are behind, because your body is learning the difference between life and assignment, between love and labor, between empathy and captivity, between warmth and responsibility, between the false egg and the true one. What you carried was not who you were. This is the heart of week 12. What you carried was not who you were. The guilt was not who you were. The room was not who you were. The emotional weather was not who you were. The family image was not who you were. The spiritual pressure was not who you were. The false responsibility was not who you were. The wound you incubated was not who you were. The cold shell you kept warming was not who you were. The role was not who you were. The collapse was not who you were. The silence was not who you were. The compliance was not who you were. The exhaustion was not who you were. The survivor you became inside ongoing harm was real, but the harm you carried was not your essence. The false assignment was not your name. The incubated wound was not your identity. Jesus knows the difference. He knows what was placed on you. He knows what was planted in you. He knows what you were trained to carry. He knows what you tried to keep alive. He knows what was never yours. And he knows the self beneath it. The incubate response helps name the holy tragedy. Your love was trained to keep something alive that could not give life back. But Jesus does not shame the love. He frees it. He separates your empathy from the false assignment. He separates your tenderness from captivity. He separates your body from the burden. He separates your name from the role. He separates your essence from what you carried. The bridge into the deeper frameworks. This is why week 12 belongs at the end of this arc. Because once the body has begun recognizing the signs of covert abuse, we can begin to see the architecture. Not just symptoms, not just reactions, not just isolated moments, but systems, roles, assignments, false responsibility, distorted empathy, captivity patterns, spiritual misuse, predatory dynamics. The deeper frameworks help name what the body has been trying to tell us. The captivity lens names the system. Spiritual physics names the architecture of harm and resurrection. Incarnational neurodivergence honors the body, wiring, perception, and truth of sensitive survivors. The incubate response names the sacred survival instinct that was redirected toward the false egg. And later, the predator architectures inside of discernment and deliverance name the kinds of systems and predators that depend on survivors continuing to carry, warm, absorb, translate, and incubate what was never theirs. So this final teaching is not an ending only. It is a threshold. It says, now that your body has been believed, we can begin to name what your body survived. Now that your symptoms have been honored, we can begin to name the system that produced them. Now that your empathy has been separated from shame, we can begin to name how it was trained, targeted, and redirected. Now that the false egg is visible, Jesus can begin redirecting your warmth back toward life. Scripture anchor. The scripture anchor for this teaching is Isaiah 46, 3-4. This is the same passage that has already carried so much tenderness in this sanctuary. God says He has carried His people from the womb and will continue to carry them. That matters here because the incubate response often forms when the survivor was made to carry too early. Carry the parent, carry the room, carry the family, carry the faith system, carry the image, carry the wound, carry the emotional weather, carry the false egg. But God's voice reverses the burden. He does not say, carry me, carry the system, carry the wound, carry the image. Carry what cannot love you back. He says, I have carried you, and I will carry you. That is the holy reversal. The survivor who was trained to incubate the false egg is met by the God who carries the true life. The God who carried you before the system assigned you a burden. The God who carried the true self when it was hidden under roles. The God who carried the child when no one else protected her. The God who carries what is actually alive. The God who does not ask you to keep warming what he has not assigned to you. This is not a call to become cold. It is a call to stop confusing carrying with love. God carries you. You do not have to keep carrying the false egg. Spiritual physics. Here is the spiritual physics of the incubate response. The unsafe system says, if you love deeply, you must carry this. Jesus says, love does not require false assignment. The unsafe system says, your empathy means this wound belongs to you. Jesus says, you can feel pain without becoming responsible for it. The unsafe system says, keep warming what gives no life back. Jesus says, come back to what I preserved in you. The unsafe system says, if you stop incubating, you are cruel. Jesus says, releasing a false burden is not cruelty. The unsafe system says, your sensitivity is the problem. Jesus says, your sensitivity was one way you survived and perceived truth. The unsafe system says, your wiring makes you too much. Jesus says, your wiring belongs to me. The unsafe system says, your gifts exist for us. Jesus says, your gifts are not fuel for captivity. The unsafe system says, your body must keep the room alive. Jesus says, your body was never created to be the womb for a system's wound. The unsafe system says, the false egg is your calling. Jesus says, I know the difference between calling and captivity. The unsafe system says, if you stop carrying, everything will die. Jesus says, what is truly mine does not require your collapse to live. The unsafe system says, you are the role. Jesus says, I call you by name. The unsafe system says, you are what you carried. Jesus says, what you carried was not who you were. That is the spiritual physics of week 12. The survivor's warmth was real. The devotion was real. The empathy was real. The pattern recognition was real. The longing for life was real. But the false assignment was not from God. Jesus does not shame the survivor for how faithfully she tried to preserve life inside captivity. He simply tells the truth. This was not yours to hatch. This was not your essence. This was not your name. This was not your assignment. This was not your calling. Come back to the life I carried in you. Gentle questions. If this teaching feels tender, you do not need to force reflection. But if it feels safe, you might gently ask, what have I been trying to keep alive that does not give life back? What wound did I believe I was responsible to hatch into healing? What role did I carry as though it were my identity? What family image, spiritual illusion, relationship, promise, or assignment did I keep warming? Where did my empathy become labor? Where did my neurodivergent pattern recognition keep me scanning for signs of life? Where did my tenderness become responsibility? Where did I confuse potential with repair? Where did I confuse understanding with assignment? Where did I confuse love with carrying? What happens in my body when I imagine releasing the false egg? What true life in me needs warmth now? What did Jesus preserve beneath the carrying? You do not have to answer quickly. You do not have to accuse yourself. You do not have to shame the love that tried to survive. You can simply notice. The purpose is not to hate your empathy. The purpose is to let Jesus restore it. The purpose is not to despise your wiring. The purpose is to let Jesus separate your wiring from captivity's demands. The purpose is not to mock the years you carried. The purpose is to finally tell the truth. What I carried was not who I was. Blessing for the survivor who incubated the false egg. For the survivor whose love was trained to keep the false egg alive. May you be met with tenderness. May no one shame the depth of your empathy. May no one mock the brilliance that helped you survive. May no one call your devotion foolish when it was formed under captivity. May your neurodivergent wiring be honored, not pathologized. May your pattern recognition be restored to truth, not scanning. May your empathy be restored to love, not labor. May your sensitivity be restored to discernment, not responsibility. May your creativity be restored to life, not exploitation. May your body stop warming what Jesus has not assigned to you. May the false egg lose its claim on your care. May the cold shell no longer consume your warmth. May every role that replaced your personhood begin to loosen. May the wound that was never yours return to the hands of God. May your true self receive the warmth that was spent elsewhere. May the child in you be carried. May the body in you be believed. May the gifts in you be protected. May the voice in you be restored. May the life in you be no longer postponed. May Jesus separate what you carried from who you are. May He call you by name beneath every false assignment. May you learn that releasing what was never yours is not the death of love. It is the return of love to truth. Closing. This is the final teaching in understanding covert abuse through the body. And we end here because the body has been telling the truth all along. The body was tired because it was watched. The body felt guilty because guilt had been installed. The body froze because movement was not safe. The body felt confused because the system distorted reality. The body became responsible because the room trained it to carry. The body tracked emotional weather because atmosphere had consequences. The body developed an internal watcher because surveillance moved inside. The body compressed identity because fullness was not safe. The body felt relief in absence because presence had a cost. The body carried what could not be spoken because language was not yet safe. The body survived ongoing harm because leaving was not yet possible. And beneath all of it, the body may have been incubating a false egg, trying to keep alive what captivity placed in its care, trying to warm what could not return warmth, trying to preserve love inside a system that confused carrying with belonging. But now we can say what you carried was not who you were. What you warmed was not always your assignment. What you understood was not always yours to heal. What you felt was not always yours to fix. What you survived was not your identity. What captivity trained your empathy to do is not the fullness of who God made you to be. Your love was real. Your wiring was brilliant. Your empathy was sacred. Your survival was intelligent. Your body was faithful. But the false egg was not your name. Jesus knows the difference between your essence and what you carried. He knows the difference between your calling and captivity. He knows the difference between love and false assignment. He knows the difference between true life and the cold shell harm placed in your care. and He is able to separate them gently, truthfully, without shaming the survivor who kept trying to preserve life. This arc has been a beginning, a doorway, a body recognition path, a way of saying to the survivor, your body was not lying. Your symptoms were not random. Your exhaustion was not weakness. Your confusion was not stupidity. Your relief was not cruelty. Your silence was not consent. Your survival was not failure, and what you carried was not who you were. From here, the deeper frameworks can open. The captivity lens, spiritual physics, cellular theology, incarnational neurodivergence, the incubate response, the predator architectures inside of discernment and deliverance, the resurrection lexicon. But for now, we close this arc gently, with the body believed, with empathy honored, with neurodivergent wiring honored, with survival brilliance honored, with the false egg named, with the true self held by Jesus. You do not have to keep warming what was never yours. You do not have to keep carrying what could not love you back. You do not have to keep confusing collapse with calling. God carries you. Jesus knows what is alive. The Spirit knows what was groaning beneath words. And the life He preserved in you is not lost. What you carried was not who you were. You are held, and what Jesus preserved in you can finally begin to breathe.